For those listening, one of the keys to success is clear, realistic, and measurable goals. In the face of preventable death and suffering, we have a moral duty to act, and we are acting. I know Americans are concerned. Throughout my life, I've tried to have measurement standards that people could understand. If the goals aren't clear, it's hard to hold people to account. A business where accountability is pretty apparent is the baseball business. All you got to do is look at the standings. It's the ultimate accountability, isn't it? Is your team winning or is your team losing? And if it's not winning, what does it take to create a winning program? The interesting challenge for baseball is it can't happen instantly. You can't win instantly. You have to have a strategy to build up your team. The oil business was pretty clear. Either the well was a good one or a bad one. And did you have more good ones than bad ones? Otherwise, you'll go out of business. And government gets a little fuzzy sometimes, a little hazy, which it frustrates a lot of Americans because it's really hard to hold government bureaucracy to account. And oftentimes it's because there are not clear goals. One of the hallmarks of the No Child Left Behind legislation was accountability, measurement. As I campaigned for governor of Texas, I asked, what are the goals of the Texas education system? And they were like, 30 goals. And it became apparent to me that the number of goals needed to be shrunk to a manageable number and one that was consequential. The goal should be, can a person read, which should be the major goal of education systems across the country. One of the reasons I ran for governor in the first place was my desire to make sure children weren't promoted to an extra grade without having a basic set of knowledge. I was particularly concerned about our minority students who it seemed to me were just being shuffled through the system without concern if they could read, write, add and subtract. Anecdotal evidence suggested that was the case because I went to a lot of inner city schools and would ask principals and teachers what they were dealing with and their problems. And one of the reasons why is that our school systems were not measuring. And we owe the children of America a good education, and today begins a new era, a new time in public education in our country. The beginning of No Child Left Behind came here in Texas when we said to the legislators, if you're going to spend money, shouldn't we know whether or not we're getting good results? It's what I call challenging the soft bigotry of low expectations. We don't think you can learn, therefore we're just going to move you through the system. And so I viewed education as a civil right. And when I got to Washington, 7% of the budget, education budget more or less, was being spent on schools. And so we said, fine, we'll support that budget. But we want to know whether it works and therefore measure. And if your children are not reading at grade level, change what you're doing. And if you don't change what you're doing, there'll be consequences, such as giving parents different choices of schools to go to. It was a tough sell at first because there are huge lobbies involved with schools. There is the school board presidents. There is the teachers union. There are those who say there's no role for the federal government. There are those who say it only ought to be the federal government. And so one of the challenges in achieving the vision of school accountability was to work through all those constituents. I had a fantastic domestic policy council person, Margaret Spellings, who worked with me as governor on education reform in Texas. And she started to, get the players all teed up to get something done, and was able, with my help to a certain extent, able to get Ted Kennedy and Judd Gregg, John Boehner, George Miller, all headed in the same direction. We had to make a few compromises here and there, and sure enough, it began to work. Teachers and administrators were held to account. Test scores improved, and minority students made gains in reading and math. What the No Child Left Behind Act does, it not only provides extra help for a child that needs help early, it also gives parents more options in the process. The main thing I was concerned about, and that is school accountability, became a part of not only the federal system, but became a part of state systems as governors and legislatures adopted that as well.
We have confronted and will continue to confront HIV/AIDS in our own country. And to meet a severe and urgent crisis abroad, tonight I propose the emergency plan for AIDS relief, a work of mercy beyond all current international efforts to help the people of Africa.
PEPFAR is a program that we put in place to stop the pandemic of AIDS on the continent of Africa. It turned out to be an effective program because millions of lives are saved. Most people listening to this Masterclass and most people in the country have no idea what PEPFAR is, when in fact it is a health initiative that saved millions of lives. Early in my administration, Condoleezza Rice came and said, "Mr. President, are you aware there's a pandemic destroying an entire generation of people on the continent of Africa?" And I said, we better do something about this because I believe all life is precious. And I believe to whom much is given, much is required, and a lot has been given to our nation. I recognize the United States can't solve every problem, but we can tackle the big ones. And I made it a priority of my administration to develop a strategy to deal with the pandemic. I was somewhat derailed by my plan for the United States to take the lead in this initiative because Secretary Powell and Secretary Thompson of HHS thought it would be best if the United States joined an international coalition of countries aimed at trying to solve this problem. I was reluctant because the United Nations, while are not aligned. It's hard to hold anybody to account within that international organization if you're trying to achieve certain results. But I agreed. And so we set up a fund. I remember we was in the Rose Garden and Kofi Annan, the head of the United Nations, came and we announced a global fund to tackle AIDS. The United States would match.
And we address problems so grave and suffering so great. My guests today have been doing their part and more. For our part, I am today committing the United States of America to support a new worldwide fund with a founding contribution of $200 million.
But nobody showed up. I mean, a few countries might have put some money in. And after a period of time, I remember calling Connie and said, "Connie, find out about that global fund. Here's a pandemic destroying an entire generation, and yet the global fund sat empty." And I said, "Forget it, we're going alone. Develop a strategy for the 17 most affected nations." And they did. It was a collaborative effort. We had people in the State Department, people at HHS, people inside the White House. We convinced a former CEO of Eli Lilly to come and set up the strategy. It was a pretty easy business plan. Here are the goals. How do we get antiretrovirals to people all across the 17 affected countries? How do we get antiretrovirals at a reasonable price so the American taxpayer can afford a lot of them? How do we get the word out about how to prevent the spread of AIDS? And I asked a lot of questions about, how do you get antiretroviral drugs to remote villages in Uganda, for example? And ultimately, what do we do about orphans? Because one of the sad dividends of the pandemic was there was a lot of boys and girls without moms and dads. One of the effective things about this program is we included faith-based groups into the delivery of antiretroviral drugs, as well as information as to how to stop the spread of AIDS. Catholic Charities, for example, has a significant presence across Africa, and we incorporated them into the strategy. And so we effectively used their networks to get antiretroviral drugs to them. Anyway, I was pleased with the response I got from these questions. And in other words, the importance of achieving objectives is to stay focused on the big goals. And the big goal here was saving lives. And I think once people realized that, they understood that it was important to stay focused on that goal. One of the interesting things about American leadership was once the United States put a plan in place, and once we executed the plan, and once it became apparent that it would work, the global fund filled up. We had authority and responsibility properly aligned because we worked with affected governments. We said, if you want our help, you develop a plan for your country. Of course, we provided assistance to make sure they understood, what could work, what couldn't work. And when the plans were in place and Congress funded the initiative, this great country got after it. When we launched PEPFAR, our goal was to support treatment for 2 million people in 5 years. Today, I'm pleased to announce that we have exceeded that goal early.
What PEPFAR has always stood for is ability to work in partnership with countries in an innovative and adapted way. And haven't we all had to innovate and adapt over the last 10 months? The number of lives that have been saved, now over 20 million, but critically, almost 3 million babies born HIV-free. And many of those babies now are over 18, entering professional school, are working today, alive today, because of the strong work we have done together.